As always, we like to begin with our acknowledgement. The Crook Canyon Archaeological Center acknowledges the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Diné, and Hickory Apache people on whose traditional homelands our campus sits. Our work is not possible without Indigenous people in the past, present, and future, and we respectfully recognize and honor ancestral and descendant Indigenous communities for their contributions of all of humankind. Crook Canyon is truly grateful to all Indigenous people, and we support the preservation and ancestral connections and sacred lands. I'm getting a little feedback here, but thank you, thank you, thank you. As everybody knows, this is a donations-only website. It's free to anyone who wants to watch any of our webinars, and we could not do it without all of you who so generously make donations to the webinars and to Crook Canyon. Looks like we are getting our speaker here. He's getting sorted out, so I'll just continue to go through a few of our slides. As always, we try to put your questions in the Q&A. You can do it any time during the webinar. You don't have to wait until the end. They will just wait for us to ask them. If the chat becomes robust, then we lose some of the questions in the chat sometimes. We are live streaming on Facebook, so you can check out our live stream, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already to see some of our past programs. We have some incredible speakers coming up in the coming weeks. Next week, we have Towards a History of American Indian-Jewish Relations with Dr. David Kaufman. Looks like to be a fascinating talk. Next Thursday. And the Thursday after that, our longtime friend and often scholar in residence here at Crook Canyon, Dr. Randy McGuire, is going to be talking about feathered serpents and pole climbing clowns, the paradox of the Southwest, Northwest, and Mesoamerican connection, which is really a cool talk. He gave it to us, to the staff earlier this year. So really recommend that you tune in for that. Just another thank you. Our folks have put together this pretty awesome word cloud and some of the pictures from our past webinars. Thank you to all of you for your donations to our series. And if you haven't donated, please consider maybe just dropping a little bit for us. You can use the QR code here and get right to our donations website. Another thing, we are a nonprofit. We're almost entirely supported by donations, so we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we didn't ask. As Ricky, my former board chair and former president of Crook Canyon, always says, you're not going to get anything if you don't ask. So if you would like another way to support our mission, please consider donating a book to our American Indian Initiative Library. Becky, would you like to say a couple of words about the library that you're building there?
Sure. One of the dreams for me here at Crook Canyon is actually to have an all-native authored library, and we are off to a good start. And it's just a cool, library to have, for anybody who is here, like our National Endowment for Humanities teachers and other people, other scholars, anybody who's interested in all different categories of American Indian authored books. And I just wanted to just say thank you to everybody who has donated to our library. And Rebecca and I are just really excited when we get books in, and it's just a really great thing to have and be able to talk about and show people. So thank you guys, and thank you everybody who's donated so far, and those who would like to donate, check it out there. It's on Amazon.com, and so you just pick a book and send it to us, and you'll receive a thank you. So, thanks.
Awesome.
And
thanks, Becky. And thanks to everybody who's already sent books and who continues to send books. It is really an incredible resource that Becky and Rebecca are building. All right. Without further ado, are we doing okay there, Dr. Figueroa?
It's a good question. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much. We're so happy that you have worked through the difficulties that Zoom can sometimes give us. I'm just gonna introduce you really quickly. Dr.
Thank you.
Robert Figueroa, our speaker today, is an associate professor of environmental justice and philosophy in the School of History, Philosophy, and Religion at Oregon State University. Go Ducks, right? Yeah, Ducks, not Beavers.
We're
And
Beavers.
he pursues a philosophy of environmental justice that extends across numerous domains, such as Latino-Latina issues, climate refugees, Indigenous environmental heritage, critical tourism studies, resettlement communities, environmental colonialism, environmental discrimination, and discriminatory environmentalism across a multitude of cases around the world. He is the director of the Environmental Justice Project for the Center for Environmental Philosophy. His scholarship has been funded by the National Science Foundation, including his co-edited volume with Sandra Harding, Science and Other Cultures, Issues in the Philosophies of Science and Technology. He also edited the special issue on ecotourism and environmental justice for the Journal of Environmental Philosophy. He is currently completing his book, Environmental Justice as an Environmental Ethic. Dr. Figueroa, we're so excited to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to see what we can get out of this. I'm going to give it a try. My video is obviously moving slow, so hopefully my video will become something that will be in the background, and hopefully my phone may not run out. So I'm hoping on those things too. I don't know what I'll be able to do in terms of clicking my PowerPoint ahead, because I don't
I
have
can
that.
share. I can share on your behalf, and if you just want to tell me next when to go to next slide, I can do that for you.
That would be wonderful.
All right.
Okay, I see it on my phone screen. Do you guys see it on your screen? No, there it is. Okay, it looks good. So yes, this image is a demonstration of our two cases, and you'll find to the left of your screen a close-up of the rock known as Uluru, and on the right you'll find one of the sites at Mesa Verde. Okay, we can switch next. So yeah, and there's interestingly some pictures aren't popping up here either, so that's strange, but I'm hoping that the whole thing works for you all. Yeah, so just to give you a sense of the location, the left side of the screen is working with Uluru, and you can see that it's located in the center of the Australian continent, what they call the Red Center, and Mesa Verde National Park and the Mesa Verde region you're familiar with, I believe, as location in Colorado, presently the United States. And next slide, please. Okay, there we go, taking just a little bit of time. Just a quick sense of the two national parks that I'm looking at here, and particularly the people. So the people who pertain most to the Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park are the Anangu. They have evidence of permanent residence in this region for over 50,000 years. The basic history of the national park here just notes that in the 1950s, we get the national park known as, Ayers Rock and Mount Olga National Park. This is now the Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park. In '85, process of handing back the land that the park is on to the Anangu occurred. The Australian government handed that back because of their permanent residence. And there's also a naming back that we saw with naming the actual sites of in the language and in the heritage of the Anangu, as opposed to the white settler colonial naming. And this became a joint national park between the Anangu and the Australia National Parks system, the Australian government, that is, and becomes a World Heritage Site 2 times, once in '87 as a natural site, or we might call it an environmental heritage site, and then in 1994 as a cultural heritage site. And there's roughly 250,000 visitors a year. That fluctuates. It may be that much more now. And a little bit of what I'll talk about is the climb controversy within the context of the moral terrains and environmental heritage. That is the main topic of the talk. And on the Pueblo right side, it's we also have ancestral relations to present people. We have the Pueblo, ancient Pueblo and present Pueblo coexisting. And we see from about 500 CE to 1200 CE, we have the focus of what we find at Mesa Verde National Park. The park itself as a history comes about in 1906, and its mission to preserve the works of man by Teddy Roosevelt, and its World Heritage designation comes in 1978 as a cultural World Heritage, and it boasts over 500,000 visitors a year. And some of what I'll be talking about in this case is the archaeological or the archaeology controversy, and try to keep these two research projects together. I'll do my best to move along quickly. So please, next slide. So these are the two projects of research where I'm drawing from. One is a 2005 research that continues with the Uluru project, and the other is the Mesa Verde project, began about 2011, and also has some continuation, as I'm testifying to right here. The Uluru project was primarily between myself and a cultural geographer in Australia. Our process was to do semi-structured interviews of tourists in Australia, and also tourists internationally based and who were visiting Uluru. The methodology is trying to look through, the affective, that is embodied experiences of tourists and how they wrestle emotionally with the contradictions that the park presents to them. And from that project, about a half a dozen or so articles and chapters came about. The Mesa Verde project is many more people involved and many more disciplines. Myself as a philosopher, we have a filmmaker, a poet, or nature writer, a digital media artist, an archaeologist, and a Santa Clara Pueblo historian and active member. And this methodology, for lack of a better term, is engaged in reflexive induction, where the scholars are talking about their own experiences to one another and making observations from their different disciplines. One of the products of that, of several products, was a text, book called Sushi and Cortez, Interdisciplinary Essays on Mesa Verde, and that was published in 2015, co-edited by two of the colleagues in the project, David Taylor and Steve Wolverton. Next slide, please. So the aim of the Uluru project is investigating the spatial dimensions of how the pedagogical arm or teachings of reconciliation at Uluru-Kata Tjuta National Park reveals the vulnerability of an Indigenous population through the environmental injustices of some tourist practices embedded within colonial identities, presumptions, and desires. And the two researchers were myself and Gordon Waite, and you see I have Kanga and Rob. That was my little, cute thing to do. Okay, so not Kanga and Rue, you get it. Next slide, please. So without going into too much detail on environmental justice, because it is such a big topic, I just wanted to point out that the definition that I use is a broad definition of conceptual connections and causal relations between environmental issues and social justice. That often gets filled out with whatever comes after the title environmental justice. I work with multiple dimensions of environmental justice since about 1989. I've been developing the justice dimensions that are relevant and changing this language over time as well. So in all instances, I'm trying to look at the dimensions of recognition, how one is recognized, the level of participation that they have, if they have voice in the matter, decision making, and their historical context with the given environmental justice struggle that we're talking about. Restorative justice is also pertaining to recognition, but comes by way of reconciliation, and that has been a primary consideration with these sites that we'll be talking about. Environmental justice is often talking about distributive justice between benefits and burdens, environmental benefits and burdens, rights, duties to one another. One of the problems of distributive justice that it leans itself into kind of socioeconomic discourse, losing a lot of cultural language that plays the larger role in some of these sites. And so you can see distributive justice, it doesn't rise to the top of the dimensions of justice as they may have in, say, 1980s. And we have even larger considerations now globally of capabilities, and some of the kind of notions that go along with capabilities will be addressed. But this capabilities theory is about getting a particular bar or achievement of opportunities and conditions of life for humans, and there are non-humans considered there as well. And people basically live below a threshold if they don't have the capabilities of their opportunities and some of the fundamental practices that make life as a human worth living. So just these other notions, the approach that I take and that I'll be espousing other people have taken and ought to take is a point of view of relational ethics, in which the relationship between the members engaged or the agents engaged is of primary importance rather than the mere individual self-interest of those two members. So it's how we relate to others, and this means both human and non-human others. Moral terrains is a framework that has emerged from my work with these two cases, and I'll be exploring that as well. So let's just kick off. If you'll switch slides, next slide. So the restorative dimension plays the largest role of environmental justice in most of this discussion, because what we're looking at are things that reference reconciliation, particularly between Indigenous cultures and peoples who are pre-existing these sites that are now national parks, and their relationship with white settler societies, in this case, the United States currently and Australia. And what's good about the restorative dimension is as it enlarges in some ways, it also plays a role in restoring or addressing ecological damages for non-humans as well. So this process of reconciliation and participatory mediation in which the dignity and transformative operations address the environmental trauma to environmental identity and environmental heritage. And those are two terms that I'll unpack in a moment. But the idea here is that what reconciliation between two parties or multiple parties achieves is a way in which human dignity and transformative opportunities, that is, opportunities to be to experience human dignity, cultural dignity, and maintain one's life ways in the face of environmental traumas or in the face of destruction. That's typically what's going on with reconciling between Indigenous peoples and settler-colonial societies, is we're in some process of maintaining, bringing back, or making opportunity for the human dignity of all of these people to work alongside each other. And let's see, it's direct and it's mediated. Sometimes the subjects of harm and the perpetrators are brought together. Sometimes it's mediated through others. And this allows for moral terrains to develop as well in these particular sites. Next slide, please. So here's the rather vague, intentionally vague definitions of an environmental identity, which we all have. We have many of them, as the amalgamation of cultural identities, ways of life, and self-perceptions that are connected to a given group's material environment. So there is, this is about the ecological system, as I'll describe, with people in it. And environmental identity is closely related to environmental heritage, where the meanings and symbols of the past frame values, practices, and places we wish to preserve as members of a community. So in other words, our environmental heritage is our environmental identity in relation to the community viewed over time. So this means it's much more collective and it's much more historical and living over time. It's contrasted to personal identity, in which someone is only considered in what is their self in some small homunculus. Any kind of personal identity here would be an environmental identity. The person exists within an environment, and then the others that they interact with make up the identity that they're aware of. It's group oriented. There's no solo person coming from some view above others. And it's not constrained by any anthropocentric reduction, which is to say that environmental identity, environmental heritage isn't just about humans, and it doesn't only go to humans. So it's not going to be reduced in that fashion. Next slide, please. So I want to add another feature to this, which has come in recent authors. The two I'm citing here are Deborah McGregor and Kyle White, both Indigenous philosophers and working in Indigenous environmental justice. It's partly to signal here because it works as a prescription and recipe for what I would say is better research going forward. But the point of these two thinkers, and there are many, many more who can be added to the Indigenous scholars, is a way of emphasizing the relational ethics. As you can see from McGregor, her relational ethics brings out the label or the idea of all our relations being beyond the human world, but including the more than non-human world, as well as the relations that go along with our ancestors, future generations, if you will, as well. And McGregor makes the critique that three of the things that are missing from the usual non-Indigenous forms of environmental justice are a loss of connecting to the relations of non-humans, the relations that we have with non-humans, a understanding or just an absence of a larger context of creation, and in this sense, the ways in which living and non-living parts of our environment, the non-human others who we also engage with, are all part of a larger process of creating a process of life. And in that creating of a process of life, we find that we're actually interacting in reciprocal ways between ourselves and the others. And the emphasis here that McGregor puts forth is that the reciprocity is actually moral obligations, if you will, between both participants. So if it has to do with my relationship to the river itself also has agency and also has a duty to me, and I have a duty to it. And we actually function best in that reciprocity. And if I fail my duty, then things fail with the river. And if the river fails in its duty, then clearly other things like health for humans and non-humans would be threatened. Kyle White offers a similar approach, but with some important terminological emphasis. His relational ethics comes from many different places, but particularly there's an interesting way in which he redefines ecology to actually include past, so present people who are interacting in that material space or with non-human others, but also an ecology includes ancestors and peoples and rituals and life ways, and it's a relational context between all of those things, and that's where we are. So we don't just limit it to the present, and we don't just limit it to nature. We see humans interacting in the ecology, and that ecology includes human past, human present, and what would be the human future of a particular group. In that way is directed as a capacity for collective continuance. This maps on well to the notion of environmental heritage, that is a group's environmental identity over time. And also White emphasizes reciprocity in numerous fashions, and points out ways in which white settler society has made obstacles for both collective continuance of Indigenous peoples, which he defines as the ability to respond to ecological changes. And the reciprocity is also obstructed where non-human others can interact with human, and vice versa. So this Indigenous environmental justice does map onto and graft onto the position that I'm putting forth. It works in the moral terrains and works in other framing that I will be discussing. But I thought it should be up front so we know just how differently we may be doing environmental justice than talking about toxic waste or urban centers at the moment. Next slide, please. Okay, so the moral terrains idea started with about three different levels working at the same time. So the idea is that wherever you are in any space, anywhere you are actually in, that space has different webs of values. That's the moral terrains. There's multiple values right there where you are. A second level is that there are converging environmental identities and heritages, that is, moral gateways open and close to these convergences. So, for instance, if your environmental identity is one of a tourist, say American tourist or a tourist from Sydney, and you're making your sort of pilgrimage to the Red Center, and then you go to Uluru, there are converging identities and heritages that are at work. One of those may be the desire to do what was permitted up until 2016, and that was permission to climb Uluru, which is against the laws of the Anangu. And they requested people not to climb, and yet the national park remained that climb, and people did it. And so there are converging environmental identities that in that case were a tourist who wants to climb versus the environmental identity and heritage of the Anangu, who are right up front requesting that you don't climb. So that's a moral gateway that closes in some ways to the tourist if they're not recognizing some of the features that have to go with the Anangu's desires. And we're looking at this in an bodily impact and how the moral terrains then lead us to opening new discoveries morally or closing moral opportunities. And that's also embodied. It's embodied by affects like guilt or anger or surprise or hope. And we're embodying those terrains as well. So the process has a flexivity as the body affects are inscribed by the moral terrains, and the moral terrains are carried by embodied agents. So as White and Dotson read it, the triadic moral ecology offers ecological hermeneutics of moral sensitivities. That is to say, moral terrains are detectable through bodily affectivity, but also inform the bodily affectivity, how we feel embodied. So the moral gateways open or close through these affective experiences and are also detected by and can inform bodily affectivity. So the terrains actually, if we engage in a certain kind of moral gateway, suppose we choose not to climb Uluru when the climb was open, then we are embodying ourselves in a different set of affects, not necessarily our pride that we aren't climbing or something like that, but we actually will engage with the Uluru differently because we're not climbing it and we're doing it, we're coming to some terrains that are also occupied by others. But lastly, there's a complexity here when we get too embodied and too affective, and that is, we also want to say that people who've never come to Uluru should also not climb, and they should take these moral insights to themselves as well. And so there's a kind of absence that might be there, and that's often who we're writing to, are people, not just those who are the visitors and tourists, but for those who may visit and may tour. And I think I'm about to lose my power on my phone. Let's move forward. Excuse me. Sorry, this is going to look good on film. Let's switch to the next slide if we can. And then just hit a 1. So one more. Yep. So, and we can hit all 4, I think, at this point. Thanks. So there's the 4 things that really came across in terms of the different moral terrains. There's the indigenous moral terrain of the Anangu, both present and past, so 50,000 years of activity. with the rock in the area of the rock, and a long activity in which the Anangu don't climb the rock either, or only certain male members of certain families do after certain rites of passage. We also see the settler-colonial moral terrain of Australia and Great Britain. People refer to it as Ayers Rock. It's a settler homeland that maintains dominance and sovereignty with a variety of expectations and perceptions, especially as we see Australians who wish to go to Uluru as a kind of pilgrimage of nationhood, and what we find with, say, international tourists as well. There's also the conscientious, ecologically and culturally aware people. And I think I just lost my phone. It's not showing up.
Maybe give us just a minute, folks, while we see if we could at least get Dr. Figueroa's voice back, if not his video projected self. So just give us a moment, please. Sorry, everybody. We're just working on this real quick. All right, we're just trying to reach him. I'm not sure that Dr. Figueroa realizes that we cannot hear him. So give us just a second here. Really grateful to all of you for tuning in. I'm very sorry about our challenges today. We did actually do a rehearsal session. Taylor always does a practice session with our speakers, and everything went just great. And we have Taylor is actually sharing his slides right now. So
I just got an email that his phone is dead, so I believe he is looking for a charger at this moment.
Oh, okay. All right. It is. Thank you for the folks in the chat saying excellent material. Looking forward to more. Me too. Actually, we the book. I think somebody messaged us here, the panelists, about the book Sushi and Cortez, which one of the co-editors of that book, Dr. Steve Wolverton, who's given, I think he's given webinars before. Taylor, has Steve given a webinar for us yet?
He has not given a webinar for us yet, unfortunately.
Oh, look, there's Steve in the chat. Perhaps we should send Steve a moderator link and have him tune in. Well, you're on deck, Steve, who, anyway, our presenter had referenced that fantastic book. You should definitely get and read Sushi and Cortez, really amazing collection of essays that touches on these kinds of ethics. Steve gave a lovely talk to our staff last year around archaeological ethics and kind of some of the new directions in archaeology and anthropology, and it was really, really fantastic. Steve always defers to one of his colleagues that he refers to as a real card carrying ethicist, as opposed to Steve, who doesn't have a card apparently, but has done some incredible work in this area. And one of our staff, who's also a member of Zuni Pueblo, and I think Laguna Pueblo, who raised his hand and said, how do you get to be a card carrying ethicist? But these are questions that we grapple with a lot at Crow Canyon, and it's been really interesting. We know a bit more, obviously, here with our areas of research and our partnerships with Pueblo people and Pueblo communities. We know a little bit more about the Pueblo aspect of this than this example from Australia. So it's been really interesting to hear this particular example. Let's see. Oh, we have one of our viewers has popped in the chat that they lead Sierra Club service trips in Grand Gulch infrequently. Oh, well, thank you for that. Absolutely. So, maybe if anybody has any thoughts or questions they'd like to share. I realize we don't have a presenter, but we can certainly do our best. Looks like Taylor has closed the presentation. We've got about just over 15 minutes or so. What do you think, Taylor?
I've not heard back from him yet on any luck on finding a phone charger, so we might want to go ahead and move into some questions if people have any in the meantime.
Yeah, I think it's I'm not seeing a lot of Q&A, and we are losing a few folks. Becky. Oh, good. Hi, Becky. Which usually this is the time of the webinar when we go into the Liz and Becky show and see if anybody has any particular questions or discussion that they'd like to have with us. Becky, what do you think about this so far, about this topic, and what you learned from our speaker about the Australian example?
I think, because it's so close to Native perspectives as well. When you're talking about the environment and how we talk about how, the trees and everything's alive and everything's a part of us. And when we're looking at the environmental part of it, the way tree rings can tell us, when the soil has been alterated by humans and underground water, and tree rings can help with that to let us know that there is something there that we can also look into scientifically and be able to talk about that, which really helps. So, and I was just thinking about that and thinking about, like, how the landscape does actually tell us when they're hurting and when there's something that has been disturbed, it like environmental justice, which is important to be able to talk about what damage is being done by, the plants and trees and stuff and the way they grow.
No, yeah. Absolutely. It's been really, for folks who don't know, our other member of our one of Becky's staff in American Indian Initiatives, Rebecca Renteria, is in addition to being an Indigenous scholar herself, is also trained in dendrochronology and has a real interest in that. And sort of Rebecca and Becky, when I hear a presentation like this, and I went and Googled a couple of the Indigenous scholars that Dr. Figueroa referenced, Deborah McGregor and Kyle White. It looks like Deborah McGregor is First Nations and Kyle is from Potawatomi tribe. And I'm always thinking about, like we do at Crow Canyon, balancing the Western science model that we went to school and learned, and our commitment to Indigenous knowledge, and then of course the fact that there are many Indigenous scholars also trained in Western science who are kind of seem like they're bringing tools from lots of different perspectives to bear on this. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I think what I really appreciate thus is that, and I think Steve spoke to this maybe when he was here, but sort of these different sort of, I guess, epistemologies. And so we have all of these communities and all of these people from all parts of the world and upbringings. And I don't know, I think this conversation holds a lot of space for different ways of thinking, different philosophies, but like Becky was saying, that they parallel each other. And so in that way, it's this, you know, amazing concept of what people like Sonia Adelaide or Robin Wall Kimmerer speak to in terms of braiding knowledge. We have all of these multiple lines or ways of thinking that that intersect, that are parallel, that don't need to be in conflict with each other. And I don't know, so that's what I really like about what he's been speaking to.
I love that multiple ways of knowing don't have to be in conflict with each other. I love that, Rebecca, and hopefully that's kind of a direction that that we're pursuing, is bring your way of knowing to the table. We don't privilege a particular way of knowing. We're really out to have conversations that can contribute to social justice, environmental justice, knowledge of our shared human past, present, and future, and try to do some good in the world with all of these perspectives combined. Really cool. I don't know if we lost Becky or not there, but oh, there she is. Becky, what do you think about, you know, you teach Western science archaeology, you teach Indigenous knowledge, you teach from the perspective of your own culture. What do you think about this, about multiple ways of knowing?
Well, it's definitely about time. You know, as an educator, you know, that's, you know, part of what the teaching and what you learn as you grow up, and you learn about, you know, the plants and what they give to you, but then you also know you can't take the last one, and you know, you always try and give back to them as well. And you know, it's just something that we you know, want to be able to put out there, so that the kids have an understanding of what's out in the landscape. You know, even though it looks a little, you know, stark, you know, there's still food there available, and knowing, you know, what is in your environment and being able to pass that along. Although, you know, you want to do it with your kids from, you know, from the reservation, but you also want other kids to learn that knowledge too, so that they can go back into their own environment and learn and understand what's in their backyard.
Right. That's fantastic. You know, we've been talking recently about Indigenous names for plants, for experiencing that environment here in the Four Corners. And there's a relatively new school there in Becky's community of Toyac on the Mountain Ute Reservation. And is that some of the intent behind the school there, is to be able to teach these kinds of cultural and other practices?
Yes, it's definitely a huge part of it. And, you know, just, you know, the kids learning more of the background, where they come from. You know, I like the fact that, you know, one of our tribal members brought his horse, you know, to the school. The kids got to learn about the horse, and, you know, our people were horse people before we were put on the reservation. And so learning more about who they are and where they come from is really important to be able to pass that down, and the kids learning youth and, being able to do that. And so it's just been, I just recently just started a youth class that they started from Fort Lewis College, and just being able to, think about the old Ute words and the new Ute words, and how, a lot of our old Ute words are telling about something like the plants, or something about them, or the location, and it's a description of it. Whereas a car is just a car, but in Ute it's a quad, so that's a car. But anything else, like red paintbrush would be, telling a little bit about it, about that plant or anything. So it's been kind of interesting to learn as well. So
Lifelong learners, right? All of us.
Yeah. All the time. So yeah, and I think that huge part of it is learning more about our environment, and having people learn and understand a little bit about what we would like to put out there, to learn that it's not just the location. There's so much more to it. Rocks or people, everything is out there. They're just not, it's just not just a rock. Everything has a meaning.
Right. And getting that, trying to educate our non-native stakeholders about that maybe would have a persuasive impact on how people think about use of the environment, and what does that mean, right, to people. Becky's been very active in some environmental degradation happening in White Mesa, where there's Ute communities, and just makes me think about the importance of public education, right? And being able to, the thought that, as I'm thinking about questions for Dr. Figueroa, maybe at the end of it, is, what do we do about persuasion, right? How do we talk to people? In the Australian example where he's talking about, there's the settler colonists and the tourists who, have their own relationship to something that is a sacred landscape that has very different meanings to Indigenous people, to Aboriginal people. How do we talk to people about that in a way that will hopefully, win some hearts and minds, change some perspectives on relating to a landscape? You're nodding, Rebecca. Do you have thoughts about that?
I do, yeah, just sort of speaking to that, and also speaking to what Becky was speaking about. I think one of the things we can do is just, there are so many Indigenous perspectives out there, like so many. And so I think part of that education is, I guess, sort of for us to like learn and be able to articulate, which we do, just the ways in which we were brought up, and life ways. And I'm thinking about just this idea of the land as a teacher. So the land exists and the land teaches, and everything that the land supports also teaches. And so in that way, we can say that the land has agency. And so all of a sudden we have this shift into the land as a person, or the land as having personhood. And so it's sort of as a foundation, as a baseline, implies that the personhood is, that the land can have a relationship, and everything that comes from the land can have a relationship with people as well. And so I don't know, I guess I like that idea as well.
I love that, Rebecca. Thank you. The land has its own personhood, and there's clearly a respect issue, not for, like Becky said, the rocks, the land, the trees. They have their own agency. Welcome back, Dr. Figueroa. We've just been
I don't know
chatting
how I
in your
made it
absence.
back. I'm really sorry, everyone. I don't know how I did it. I
You have
won't,
5 minutes. What would you
yeah,
like to say?
won't pick up where I left off. It's really a shame because, of course, that was a PowerPoint that I canceled everything else in my life to do, of course, because this is more important. I thought the most recent comment I just heard was really excellent, and it's hard for me to figure out where I left off and where I would go in 5 minutes. If anybody has a question, I can answer that. I guess.
Someone just asked, what is Ayers Rock? Is that, I can't remember which reference that was to, but.
Okay, so Ayers Rock is
Ayers
the white settler reference to Uluru.
Okay.
It's the big red rock in the center, and it was initially called Ayers Rock because of some British dude who somehow discovered it, and very early on, it was the first ranger in the 50s of the park who put chain link um, railing basically to go up and do the climb, and it became that park. So Uluru is what has always been what people called Ayers Rock. And Kata Tjuta is another site within the park, which is what people couldn't pronounce because, whatever. So they called it the Olgas. So those are two sites there.
Well, maybe we are, we would like to try to bring you back to sort of finish it, but maybe since the portion of your talk that you got through was really the Australia example, maybe wrap up with giving us, we've got a handful of minutes, maybe talk a little bit about what that means to you, where, what are the really resonating points, and what would you like us to take away from that?
Yeah, so that's good, and I think also with regard to Mesa Verde as well. I mean, one of the things is to recognize, obviously that in our tourism or in our visiting, we have all sorts of experiences that are going on, and the idea of the moral terrains is really to see, how many values are actually layered there, and then to see where we are in relation to those layers. That's that relational ethics. So, for instance, one of the things that I thought was intriguing about Uluru was when the Anangu were constantly pleading for tourists not to climb, but the park kept it open. Tourists would, especially international tourists from the US, would make the point that in our national parks in the US, the rangers have a gun, and a gun keeps people from doing things that they ought not do in that particular space. And I thought this was really telling when the Anangu said, you do know that you tried to wipe us out off this continent with guns, and we don't do guns, like we don't use the master's tools to keep people off of it. If we really have reconciliation between us and others or white settler, then yeah, not all have guns, but you get my point. You get my point. They're policing. So in any case, the point being that Indigenous people have a different attitude towards guns in some cases. And in this case, using the master's tools was not the way to reconcile with white settler people. If you aren't going to climb because you have respect for the Anangu, you're taking that first step towards the reconciliation process in which you are actually respecting the people rather than trying to sort of carve out some place in which this is as much my right than others. Yes, I don't think I'm going to argue with rangers about how great rangers are or non-rangers. I love rangers. The point I think that people may be getting is that that's not how you make reconciliation happen, is by force of any sort, whether it be guns or not guns. Ultimately, what did happen was that, as I had predicted in various writings, was that
the conditions in the land management policy, in the parks management policy, the conditions were that if certain things were met, 3 possible conditions, then the climb would close. If there was tourism that was unaffected, that is, the tourism industry survived, that would be fine. If people indicated they would still come even if the climb were closed, and if the climbing reduced down to a certain percentage, like 10% of the visitors climbed. The problem with that is as a climb starts to close, you get more and more people wanting to do it so that they can say that they have done it. And the rush in 2016 was ridiculous, the amount of people who went to climb before they closed it. And it just indicated that particular thing. And it also indicated that the Anangu were not waiting any longer for those 3 conditions to be met, which I had argued in various places had been met over and over and over. They just said, look, the land management, joint management structure between the white settler government and the Anangu is not happening. The white settler government is not respecting the Anangu members, who are even getting to the top of the chair of the board for managing. They just weren't respecting. They weren't treating them either with respect or even the equal dignity, and the Anangu had just had it. So they said, it's closed. It's now officially closed. So we have to remember that that park sits on Anangu land and ultimately is theirs. But since they don't have the resources to run a national park, it's been leased back to the government for 90 years, 99 years to keep it going until the Anangu can or might be able to run a national park. So that's how we have this particular situation. So I see, how can we give precedence to one group over another when there's conflict and desired use? Well, again, this is an issue of environmental justice. It's an issue of environmental trauma, land taken away, disconnection with the land, and it's led to incredible dysfunctions within the Indigenous communities worldwide, but especially within Australia, and particularly the Anangu, because they're most affected. So there's that context, and there are many conflicting uses. The point we might ask is, who's got their identity wrapped up in this the most? The environmental heritage, the collective continuance, the cultural values, and are we, those of us who don't have that much at stake, are we respecting those people in their context? And it's hard to see how the ancient or present Pueblo are being respected through the way in which Mesa Verde and some of the archaeological practices in Mesa Verde are being carried out. There's recognition of 26 tribes affiliated with the Mesa Verde. There's definitely reconciliation efforts that have been made through NAGPRA. But the average tourist isn't aware of how much they're involved in this particular process. So again, it's a point of directing us towards joint management and looking at the kinds of dangers and depth of joint management, particularly in terms of the life ways of Indigenous peoples and the values of Indigenous environmental justice, how we're related to one another, and these environs or ecologies that we ourselves also inhabit.
Mm-hmm. That's a fantastic note, I think, to conclude on. And thank you for clearing your schedule to do this. And I'm terribly sorry about that, but I think it worked out. We had a little more engagement from the chat when we had a little break and had some other discussions. I hope that you will come back and do the other half. I think lots of people are interested in your in the Mesa Verde portion. I'm very interested in that portion of your presentation as well, and it fits in very closely to the work that we're doing at Crow Canyon now. So
And that's what I would have applauded, both Crow Canyon and where I've been seeing archaeologists embracing these ideas of Indigenous environmental justice, especially. And I would reference here the archaeological review of last March, which was dedicated to archaeology and environmental justice. And I thought that was very deepening, and it's a really good sign of how we would go in moving forward.
Fantastic. Becky, did you have any closing remarks?
No, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Sorry that things went a little awry, but yeah, we definitely want you to come back. And I love the Crow Canyon poster behind you.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, Crow Canyon poster.
Product placement, yes.
Butler Wash. You know, it's I am in the Northwest, but you know, I'm projecting and channeling you all.
Fantastic. Rebecca, did you have any closing remarks?
Just thank you so much. It's, your work is aligning with a lot of the ideas in my own work, and that we're coming from different disciplines. It's reassuring to me that we can have all of these different ways that are sort of working towards a similar.
Awesome. Thank you. What a great discussion all around. So sometimes the magic is in those little moments when things didn't go as predicted. So we do that a lot around here. So.
Yeah, once the speaker leaves, everybody can have fun. It's, the parental thing. Thank you all for your time. Thank you, everyone who showed up. I apologize for a million different things that have gone wrong. And I got that close to throwing my computer out. So I took one last chance, but I will always come back and I now will fix my computer. So
excellent.
I will take any invitation you have, and anyone who wants to email me for any questions, citations, etc., copy of the PowerPoint, just let me know. Just write to me, Robert.Figueroa, it's just the same spelling, at Oregon State, that's one word, .edu. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you for everybody who was watching. This actually was really fun. So
Good.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Okay. Bye-bye.